The sound of the gunshot still echoes in my mind, a deafening crack that shattered everything in its path. My heart skipped a beat as I turned, watching in horror as my daughter fell to the ground, her body contorting in pain. The blood seeped through her clothes, staining the concrete beneath her. She cried out in agony, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, please!" But it wasn't just the pain in her voice that struck me, it was the cold, chilling words that followed. "You'll never walk again," Karen said, her voice eerily calm, like she had no remorse for what she had just done. This is what happens when you disobey HOA rules. I could barely breathe, my chest tightening with fear and fury. My daughter, the one person I loved more than anything in this world, had been shot by someone who was supposed to be a neighbor, someone who had made my life miserable with petty complaints, but never to this extreme. Karen stood there, the gun still in her hand, her expression as emotionless as a stone. For a split second, everything seemed to stop, but then the panic set in. My daughter needed me, and I couldn't stand there paralyzed. I rushed to her side, desperately trying to stem the bleeding, but all I could think was, how did it come to this? How could a simple rule dispute escalate into something so horrific? I could feel my heart breaking as I held her, but there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. Not this time. Not ever. The story didn't begin that day. It began months ago when Karen first started making her presence known. She wasn't just another overbearing neighbor. No, she had a need to control, a hunger for power that ran deeper than any rule enforcement. From the very beginning, she made it clear that she had a place for everyone, and if you didn't fit, you'd be punished. My daughter's disability had always made life a little harder, but we managed. We had a rhythm, a system that worked for us. I would help her with everything she needed, getting in and out of the car, moving around the house, taking her to school. It wasn't always easy, but we were a family and we had each other's backs. But Karen didn't care about that. She didn't care that my daughter couldn't walk without assistance or that she needed space to maneuver her wheelchair. To Karen, we were just another inconvenience, another violation of her perfect world. It started small, complaints about parking too close to the curb, about not trimming the bushes the way she thought they should be trimmed. I ignored it at first, hoping it would blow over. Maybe Karen was just the type of person who liked things in order. But she didn't stop. She started pushing for more, demanding that we obey her rules, even if it meant putting my daughter's needs second. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about Karen's need for control. She demanded that we park our car in a different spot, even though the spot we used was legally designated for disabled parking, and it made it easier for my daughter to get in and out of the car. She didn't care about that, though. She didn't care about my daughter's needs or the difficulty we already faced each day. All she cared about was making sure her perfect neighborhood looked the way she wanted it to. When I tried to explain this to her, she was dismissive, as if my daughter's mobility challenges were just an inconvenience. I tried to be patient, to reason with her, but it was clear that Karen wasn't interested in compromise. She wanted things done her way, and the more I pushed back, the more aggressive she became. She would show up at my door, unsolicited, with lists of complaints, none of them justified, but all of them designed to undermine my confidence, to make me feel like I didn't belong here. Soon, Karen started spreading rumors about our family. She whispered to the neighbors that we were bad for the neighborhood, that we were ruining the community's integrity by not conforming to her standards. She accused me of taking up too much space, of breaking the rules, and began isolating us from others in the neighborhood. No one dared to stand up to her. She had a way of manipulating the situation, of making herself seem like the victim. The neighborhood was split, and we were left on the outside. I tried to ignore her, tried to rise above it. I reminded myself that this wasn't about me, it was about my daughter. I didn't want her to grow up in a place where people like Karen had the power to intimidate us, to make us feel small. I knew I had to protect her, and I couldn't let someone like Karen make her feel unwelcome in her own home. But it wasn't long before Karen's behavior escalated from passive-aggressive to outright threatening. She began calling city officials, filing complaints against us for every minor infraction she could think of, whether it was the way we trimmed the hedges or the way we parked our car. Karen found a way to report us. I thought that maybe once the authorities got involved, she would back off. But I was wrong. Every time I thought we had found a solution, Karen just found another way to make our lives harder. Her words, her complaints, her manipulations, they were relentless. And then, one day, Karen found an opportunity to strike. A simple parking dispute turned into something much darker. My daughter and I had parked in our usual spot, the one that Karen had been complaining about for weeks. As I was helping my daughter out of the car, I saw Karen walking toward us, her face twisted with anger. She had a look in her eyes I'd never seen before. Something dark, something dangerous. She didn't even let me speak before she snapped. "You're parked in the wrong spot again. I've told you about this. You can't just do whatever you want. You're making this neighborhood look terrible." I tried to explain, tried to tell her again that my daughter needed this space, that we had every right to park here. But Karen wasn't interested. Her voice grew louder, and her words more venomous. She wasn't just angry now, she was completely unhinged. "You never listen. You never follow the rules," she shouted, her face flushed with rage. And then, just like that, Karen reached into her bag and pulled out a gun. I froze. I couldn't believe what was happening. My mind couldn't process it. "You learn to follow the rules one way or another," she said, her voice eerily calm. Before I could react, before I could even warn my daughter, Karen fired the gun. The shot rang out like a thunderclap, and my world went dark. My daughter screamed in pain as she collapsed to the ground, clutching her spine. Blood soaked her clothes as she writhed in agony, her legs lifeless. Karen stood there, the gun in her hand, her eyes wide with twisted satisfaction. "You'll never walk again," she said, as if delivering a verdict. The cruel words echoed in my ears as I rushed to my daughter's side, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to keep her conscious. But all I could think was that my world was crumbling. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was a life-or-death battle, and Karen had taken it too far. That afternoon, everything came to a head. My daughter and I had just returned from a long doctor's appointment. She was exhausted, and I was drained. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Karen standing at the edge of the sidewalk, her figure rigid, arms crossed, and that all-too-familiar air of superiority surrounding her. The way she watched us as we parked, it was as if she were waiting for something to happen, as if she had already made up her mind about what we deserved. "You parked too close to the sidewalk again," Karen said, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. The words were so charged, so accusatory, as though it were the biggest crime in the world. "This is the last time I'm going to let you get away with it." I felt my chest tighten as I helped my daughter out of the car, her body stiff with fatigue. The last thing she needed was another confrontation, but here it was escalating as usual. I glanced at my daughter, whose tired eyes mirrored my own frustration, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Karen, we've talked about this. My daughter needs the space to get in and out of the car safely. We're not doing anything wrong," I said, trying to reason with her. But Karen wasn't interested in reasoning. Her eyes narrowed, and her expression twisted into one of pure defiance. She was past the point of logic. She wasn't looking to have a conversation. She was looking to dominate, to show me who was in control. "I'm done explaining myself to you," I added, trying to steer the conversation back to reason. But Karen, she wasn't listening anymore. Her mouth twisted into a hard line, and she reached into her coat pocket. My eyes locked onto her hands, watching in disbelief as they pulled something shiny from beneath her jacket. It was a gun. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, everything around me went silent. My mind couldn't process what was happening. Was she serious? Was this really happening? The air felt like it had been sucked out of the world. My body, paralyzed with shock, could barely move. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't playing. She wasn't threatening, she was about to act. I barely had time to react before Karen's finger tightened on the trigger. The sound of the gunshot split the air with a violent crack. It all happened so fast, faster than I could comprehend. My daughter screamed in pain, a cry that cut right through my soul. The sound of her voice, the desperation in it, was enough to make everything around me spin. Her body collapsed onto the ground in a heap, her hands clutching her back. I could barely move. My legs gave out, and I dropped to my knees beside her. Her eyes were wide with terror, filled with pain and confusion. Blood began to pool around her, dark and thick. Her legs, limp, unresponsive, lay twisted beneath her as she gasped for air. I could see the red stains spreading, the life slowly draining out of her. The world felt like it was crumbling beneath me as I tried to wrap my arms around her, pulling her close, but the weight of the situation was too heavy. The pain was too much for both of us. "You'll never walk again," Karen's voice rang out, her words like daggers, cold and unforgiving. She stood over us, holding the gun with the same unbothered, emotionless expression she always wore. This is what happens when you don't follow the rules. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My daughter was on the ground, bleeding out, and Karen was standing there, taunting us. Her words, her callousness, hit me harder than the shot itself. "You'll never walk again," she repeated, as if it was some kind of sick lesson she was teaching me. "This is the cost of disobedience." I turned back to my daughter, her face pale, her body trembling in my arms, her eyes locked with mine, and I could see the fear in them. Fear of the pain, fear of the uncertainty. I could feel her struggle to stay conscious, but the blood loss was too much. I could feel my hands growing slick with her blood as I tried to stem the bleeding, to hold her together. But nothing I did was enough. "Stay with me, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice breaking as I tried to stop the flow of blood from her spine, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. The warmth of her blood was overwhelming. I could hear her gasping, her breath shallow, and I couldn't stop the tears that welled up in my eyes. "Please, just hold on. I'm right here. We're going to be okay." But Karen's words echoed in my head. "You'll never walk again." I tried to block them out, but they gnawed at me, reminding me of the sheer cruelty of it all. This wasn't just a physical injury, it was a life-altering, cruel act, one that would haunt us forever. My daughter had so much to look forward to, and now, because of Karen, everything was uncertain. Everything was broken. The sirens wailed in the distance, and I knew help was on its way. But it felt like an eternity. I couldn't afford to wait. The seconds felt like hours as I tried to keep my daughter alive, to keep her with me, to make sure she knew she wasn't alone. But Karen stood there, unbothered, watching us with a smile creeping onto her lips, her grip still tight on the gun. "Karen," I finally croaked, my voice hoarse with anger, "you'll pay for this. You'll pay for what you've done to her. You won't get away with it." Karen's smile didn't falter. "I already have," she said, as if the whole thing were already over. "It's done." Looking back, I can now see the signs, the small clues I'd ignored over the months that pointed toward the escalating tension between Karen and me. At first, I dismissed her behavior as that of an overbearing neighbor, someone who was just too fixated on maintaining the perfect neighborhood. We all know someone like that, right? The person who feels like they have the authority to enforce rules on everyone around them, regardless of whether those rules make sense or not. But Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was more than a stickler for the rules, she was a control freak. It wasn't enough that the community followed the HOA guidelines. No, Karen had to control every little detail, every aspect of the neighborhood. Over time, her need to control grew, and I was unfortunate enough to be one of her targets. My family moved into this neighborhood hoping for a fresh start. My daughter's disability meant life was already hard enough, and I hoped that the peaceful suburban life would offer us some respite. For a while, it seemed like the perfect place, but Karen had her eyes on us from the beginning. It started with minor complaints. First, it was the way we trimmed the hedges. Then, it was about the color of our front door. It wasn't long before she began pointing out things that didn't fit into her very specific idea of order. She made small, petty remarks, and I dismissed them, telling myself that it was just her personality. Everyone has one difficult neighbor, I thought, but Karen wasn't like the others. She didn't just stop at petty complaints. She was relentless. She'd show up at our door with notes from the HOA, telling us that our lawn was a few inches too long or that our mailbox was too tall. She wanted to make sure we complied with every little detail, no matter how insignificant it seemed. And when we didn't, that's when the tension started to build. The constant nagging, the subtle threats, it all began to wear on me. But what truly began to concern me was when Karen started talking about my daughter. She didn't just critique the way we lived, she started to criticize who we were as people. One afternoon, as I was helping my daughter from the car, Karen approached me, her expression hard as always. "It must be tough for her, huh?" she said, nodding at my daughter who was in her wheelchair. "I mean, it must be difficult to live like that, taking up space in the neighborhood. Maybe it's time you considered moving to somewhere better suited for people like her." I stood there stunned. "What did you say?" I finally managed to ask. People with disabilities, she continued, almost as if she was offering me some twisted kind of advice. "They really don't belong in this neighborhood. It's just too much for the others, and your parking situation? It's just an eyesore. You can't keep parking like that." The words struck me harder than I expected. I had heard people make cruel remarks in the past, but Karen's comments were different. They weren't just an insult, they were an attack. I was shaking with anger, but I couldn't find the words. After that, I knew something was wrong. I could feel Karen's hostility growing, and it became clear that it wasn't just about the HOA rules anymore. It wasn't about a lawn that wasn't trimmed to her standards or a mailbox that didn't meet her approval. It was about control. Karen wanted to control the entire neighborhood, and she wanted to control us. She saw us as an inconvenience. My daughter's disability, our existence, everything about us was a threat to the perfection she imagined. As weeks turned into months, the subtle cruelty grew. Karen would approach us in public, mocking my daughter's struggles, making passive-aggressive comments about how we took up too much space in the community. She'd call the HOA for the smallest infractions, and I began to feel like we were under constant surveillance. It wasn't just the constant complaints, it was the emotional toll, the way she tried to isolate us from the other neighbors. At one point, Karen began circulating rumors, telling people that we were troublemakers, that we were living off the system, and that my daughter was a burden to the neighborhood. She even convinced a few neighbors to stop speaking to us, convincing them that we didn't belong. She was slowly turning the entire community against us. And what made me realize that we were in real danger was when Karen began targeting my daughter directly. She started taking shots at my daughter's disability, making comments like, "It's a shame you have to park so close to the door. I'm sure people who actually need the space would appreciate it more." Or, "It's a shame she can't walk like the other kids." It really messes up the aesthetic of the neighborhood. It wasn't just the words that hurt, it was the way she said them. There was no empathy, no understanding. There was only cruelty disguised as concern. And then it hit me. This wasn't about parking or lawn care. This was personal. Karen was targeting my daughter. She wasn't just trying to maintain a perfect neighborhood, she was trying to erase us. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I went to the HOA board, but Karen's influence was so strong, they dismissed my concerns. They listened to her version of the story, and every time I tried to speak up, they shut me down. No one would stand up to her. And I began to feel like I was fighting a losing battle. But it wasn't just about petty complaints anymore. Karen had decided we weren't worth her time, that we were a problem that needed to be solved. She thought that by hurting my daughter, by taking away her ability to walk, she could finally break us. She thought that by asserting her power in the most violent way, she could make us bend to her will. What Karen didn't realize was that she had miscalculated. We weren't broken. We weren't going to be silenced. We weren't going to let her win. The shooting wasn't just the culmination of a petty dispute. It was the result of months of escalating cruelty. Karen had decided we weren't worth her time, that we were a problem to be solved. She thought that by wielding her authority, by hurting my daughter, she could finally silence us. But what she didn't anticipate was how strong we were. What she didn't realize was that we wouldn't just let her walk away from this, that we would fight back. I wasn't just fighting for my daughter's life. I was fighting for our dignity, our right to exist in peace. And that fight was far from over. The moment the gunshot pierced the air, everything seemed to slow down. My body went cold as I watched my daughter drop to the ground, her body crumpling as if the life had been sucked out of her in an instant. The world around me blurred as the pain-filled scream she let out ripped through the silence, and the blood, so much blood, spilled from her body, soaking into the ground. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The reality of the situation was too much to process. My daughter, the child I had fought so hard to protect, was on the ground, gasping for air, her eyes wide with fear, her legs lifeless. "Mom," she cried, her voice weak, desperate. "Help me. I can't. I can't feel my legs." I rushed to her side, tears streaming down my face, my hands shaking as I tried to stop the blood from flowing. But it was too much. My mind was a blur. Nothing made sense. How had we gone from a simple parking dispute to this? How had Karen, someone I had trusted to simply be a difficult neighbor, turned into this monster? I didn't care about the rules anymore. I didn't care about anything except saving my daughter. I held her in my arms, my hands pressed tightly against the wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding, but her body was trembling too violently for me to do anything but cry out for help. "Please, please stay with me, baby," I whispered through clenched teeth. I tried to keep her eyes focused on mine, to keep her conscious, but the terror I saw in her face was enough to break my heart into 1,000 pieces. Her eyes were filled with confusion. She couldn't understand what was happening, and I couldn't explain it to her. All I could do was hold her, whisper her name, and promise her that she would be okay. But in that moment, I didn't know if she would be okay. Karen stood a few feet away, still holding the gun loosely in her hand, her face unbothered. She didn't seem afraid. She didn't seem guilty. She just stood there, watching us, almost enjoying the scene. The same twisted smile from earlier spread across her face as she looked at me, and her words rang out in that cold, detached voice. "You're lucky I didn't shoot you too," she said, as though it were a casual observation. "You wouldn't have listened to the rules, so now you and your little girl have to pay the price." "Karen," I screamed, my voice raw with desperation. "You're a monster. What's wrong with you? How could you do this?" She didn't respond immediately. She just looked at me, the gun still in her hand, the air heavy with the tension between us. "It's your fault," she said calmly, almost bored. "You never learn. I gave you plenty of chances to do the right thing, to follow the rules. But you didn't listen. And now your daughter is going to pay the price for your stubbornness." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could she be so cold? How could she just stand there, unaffected by the pain and suffering she had caused? I was furious, my anger surging with every second that passed, but I couldn't focus on her anymore. My daughter needed me. The blood was pooling faster now, and I could see the life draining from her with every passing second. I could feel the fire of rage igniting within me. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let Karen walk away from this, thinking she had the power to destroy our lives. I wasn't going to let her be the one to decide my daughter's future. My daughter deserved to live a full, happy life, not be taken down by someone like her. I turned back to my daughter, my hand trembling as I wiped the tears from her face. "You're going to be okay. I'm not going to let her win. I promise you I'll make sure she pays for this," I whispered. Though my voice quivered with uncertainty, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't let Karen get away with this. In that moment, something snapped in me. I could no longer just be a victim of Karen's cruelty. I had to act. I had to fight back, not just for my daughter, but for our future. I couldn't stand by and let her ruin us. I looked at Karen, my fury igniting like a flame. "You think this is over?" I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just walk away from this? You won't. I'm going to make sure you pay for everything you've done to us. This isn't just about parking anymore. This is about you trying to destroy my family." Karen's face twisted with a mix of surprise and irritation. She hadn't expected me to fight back, but it was too late. There was no going back now. The woman who had terrorized us for months, the one who had made our lives a living hell, wasn't going to get away with it. She took a step forward, her face cold and emotionless. You think you can stop me? You think the system is going to care? I've been untouchable. No one's ever been able to touch me. Not the HOA, not the neighbors. You're just one more inconvenience I had to eliminate. As she took another step toward us, I saw the look in her eyes, the confidence, the belief that she was above it all. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't afraid of her twisted sense of control. I was going to make sure she understood that she had crossed a line she couldn't erase. Help is on the way, Karen, I said, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. And you will never get away with what you've done. You've hurt the wrong people. Karen didn't flinch. She just stood there, watching me with that same cold, calculating stare. We'll see about that, she said with a smile, turning away slowly, her figure fading into the distance as I held my daughter's limp body close to mine. The hospital staff worked tirelessly, trying to stabilize my daughter. Every second felt like an eternity as I sat beside her, holding her hand, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I tried to reassure her, but my own words faltered. There was so much blood, so much pain, and despite the doctor's best efforts, I couldn't shake the fear that I might lose her. The hours dragged on as they rushed her through surgery, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. It wasn't until much later, when I was sitting in the waiting room, that I could finally let myself breathe. The doctors had told me she was going to be okay physically, but emotionally the damage was far deeper. Her body would heal, but the trauma, the betrayal of someone she trusted, would take much longer to overcome. I refused to leave her side for more than a few minutes. The nurses were kind enough to offer me coffee and support, but I wasn't interested in anything except watching my daughter's chest rise and fall, seeing her alive. Every time she opened her eyes, I felt a sliver of hope. And every time she closed them, I felt my heart lurch. As for Karen, things were moving fast. The police arrived at the scene immediately after the incident, and Karen was arrested without hesitation. It was surreal watching the woman who had caused so much pain in our lives being led away in handcuffs, her smug expression slowly fading as reality set in. The control she had over the HOA, the power she thought she wielded over us, had all come crashing down. She wasn't just a difficult neighbor anymore. She was a criminal, and now she would have to answer for what she had done. But even with Karen behind bars, I couldn't shake the sense that something was missing. I had watched her act with such coldness, such cruelty, that I felt I had to make sure she paid for what she did. Not just to my daughter, but to everyone she had tormented, manipulated, and harmed over the years. The trial came a few months later. It was a long, painful process, one that dredged up all the anger, fear, and sadness we'd been holding inside. Karen, of course, tried to minimize her actions. She tried to claim it was an accident, that she was merely enforcing the rules, and that my daughter's injury was just a consequence of our defiance. Her defense attorneys made all sorts of baseless arguments, trying to paint her as a victim of our disrespect for the rules. But I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the truth or rewrite the story. I sat through every part of the trial, listening as the prosecution laid out the undeniable evidence. Karen's history of cruelty, her obsessive control, her escalating behavior, and most damning of all, the cold and calculated way she had shot my daughter. There was no denying the malice in her actions, no way to explain away what she had done. The witnesses who had seen Karen's behavior over the years came forward, describing her actions in chilling detail. It was heart-wrenching, listening to their testimonies, hearing how Karen's manipulation had affected so many families in the neighborhood. People who had been too afraid to speak out before were now standing up, sharing their experiences. The full scope of her cruelty was laid bare, and it became clear to the jury that Karen had been a bully, a controller, and a dangerous woman whose thirst for power had finally led to violence. When the verdict came, I felt my breath catch in my throat. Karen was found guilty of attempted murder. The relief that washed over me was immediate, but it was also bittersweet. Yes, Karen would face justice for her actions, but nothing would ever undo the trauma she had caused. My daughter's life had been permanently altered, and the emotional scars from that day would linger long after the trial was over. Karen was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. I couldn't bring myself to feel satisfaction when I heard it. It wasn't about the prison sentence. It was about the fact that she had taken something from us, something irreplaceable: my daughter's innocence, her sense of safety, and her belief in the goodness of the world. The damage had been done, and no prison sentence could ever give that back. But I was glad to see her held accountable. I was glad that justice had been served. In the end, it wasn't just about punishing Karen. It was about making sure that no one like her could ever hurt someone again without consequences. It was about showing that no matter how much power someone thinks they have, no one is untouchable. I had fought for my daughter's future, and in the end, I had won. We had won. The months following the trial were a mix of healing and struggle. My daughter, despite the physical wounds she had endured, began to recover. But it was the emotional toll that was harder to overcome. She was angry, scared, and confused. She had trusted Karen, and now that trust had been shattered in the worst way possible. But slowly, with time, love, and therapy, we began to rebuild. My daughter started regaining her confidence, step by step, though it would take years for her to fully heal from what Karen had done. The emotional scars would stay with her, but they didn't define her. They didn't take away her strength. I spent every moment I could reassuring her, telling her she was safe now, that nothing like this would ever happen again. It took time, but we learned to trust again. We learned to live in peace again. And most importantly, we learned that we were stronger than Karen's cruelty. She may have taken something from us, but in the end, she had given us something too: a reminder of just how strong we could be when we fought back, when we refused to let someone like her destroy our lives. We were survivors. We were fighters. And we would not be broken. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything we've endured, I feel an overwhelming mix of emotions: pride, strength, and a deep sadness that we even had to go through this. Proud of the way my family has stood tall through the darkest moments, proud of the love and resilience we found in each other, and yet heartbroken because no one should ever have to face the kind of cruelty we experienced. No parent should have to watch their child suffer like this, especially not at the hands of someone who is supposed to be a neighbor. But even through the pain, we've come out stronger. My daughter is healing, not just physically, but emotionally as well. It's been a tough journey, but we're walking it together, and that's what matters most. Karen tried to break us, tried to tear us apart, but we fought back with everything we had. We refused to let her win. If you've ever been pushed to your limits, made to feel small or powerless by someone else, you know just how hard it can be to stand up for yourself. But I want you to know this: no one can take away your strength unless you let them. Stand up for what's right. Stand up for yourself. Never let anyone convince you that you don't deserve to be heard. This isn't just my story, it's all of ours. It's a story of survival, resilience, and the unshakable will to fight for justice. If you believe no one should ever be treated the way we were, hit that subscribe button. Let's make sure these stories are heard and that no one like Karen can hurt others again. The fight for justice doesn't end here. We're just getting started.